Beautiful people, please consider subscribing to support our channel. Help us reach our goal of 1,000 subscribers.
Xerec-17 crouched low behind the dense foliage, his compound eyes flicking between the towering metallic structures ahead. His mission was clear: infiltrate, observe, and report. The Veltharian High Command suspected Earth was preparing for war, and he was their first scout sent to evaluate the planet's combat readiness. Intelligence had been scarce, but what little they knew suggested that humans, despite their unassuming stature, were a warlike species, masters of deception and strategy. His 6-digit fingers tensed against the damp earth soil. What he saw now only confirmed the worst. Before him, hundreds of humans moved in synchronized formations, dressed in bright but strangely identical uniforms. Warriors, no doubt. Their garb was ceremonial, yet their movements carried purpose. Some clutched weapons, long cylindrical devices Xerec didn't recognize, while others stood near large, fast-moving transport vehicles that roared as they shot forward on curved metal rails. He recognized the signs immediately. It was a war camp, a sprawling military training facility dedicated to battle simulations. And if the humans were training in such large numbers, they were preparing for something monumental. Xerec activated his translation module, listening in on nearby conversations. The words he picked up were oddly light-hearted for a military exercise. Soldiers referred to fast passes and queues, discussed ride intensity, and debated whether the hot dogs were worth it. He narrowed his eyes. Coded language. The humans were masking their operations under layers of civilian terminology. Clever, dangerous. A group of warriors rushed past him, laughing, an unsettling display of confidence. Xerec had never seen soldiers so at ease before a trial of combat. Even the most hardened Veltharian warlords carried an edge of anxiety before a skirmish, but these humans thrived on it, almost relished the anticipation of battle. He tracked their path, following them toward a massive, fortress-like structure emblazoned with neon symbols and grotesque imagery. A war doctrine shrine, no doubt. The entrance pulsed with eerie red light, as though inviting warriors into a simulated underworld. As he approached, Xerec took careful note of the surrounding defenses. Tall, towering constructs stretched toward the sky, some spinning violently while others dropped at impossible speeds. He grimaced. These must be gravity training drills, designed to desensitize soldiers to the horrors of rapid descent. If humans trained like this daily, their aerial combat expertise must be unrivaled. He positioned himself behind a structure housing what appeared to be a command node. A human male, clearly a superior officer based on his authoritative tone, stood near, a smaller group issuing what seemed to be orders. "All right, listen up. The coaster is at full capacity, so we'll reroute to the haunted house first. No complaints. I don't care if you think the line is too long. We've got a schedule to keep." Xerec's ridged brow furrowed. The meaning was unmistakable. The senior officer was instructing his unit to endure a trial of psychological warfare first before engaging in high-speed maneuver drills. Even more concerning, the human recruits were visibly eager to comply. Either they were deeply disciplined, or their war-hardened culture had stripped them of all fear. He needed to see for himself. Keeping to the shadows, he maneuvered past several towering statues, effigies of warriors frozen mid-battle, no doubt, meant to inspire recruits, and edged closer to the entrance of a ride where humans strapped themselves into complex mechanical seats. They were launching themselves at terrifying speeds through steel loops and sharp angles, subjected to forces that would crush an untrained warrior. Xerec watched as they returned from their trials, faces flushed, their voices rising in celebratory cries. The victorious ones high-fived, while others staggered, visibly weakened but still grinning. Horrifying. He had seen warriors celebrate survival, but never had he seen them rejoice in suffering. These were not soldiers who endured hardship. These were soldiers who craved it. A voice crackled in his ear, breaking through his frantic thoughts. "Zirek 17, report," came the cold, sharp tone of High Commander Velzoth. Zirek hesitated. How could he possibly explain what he was witnessing? That Earth's soldiers engaged in combat exercises voluntarily, for amusement. That they actively sought out trials that would break most Veltharians? He swallowed, adjusting his communicator. "Humans possess unparalleled resilience," he murmured. "Their warriors undergo psychological and physical endurance training daily. They seem to take pleasure in their own suffering." A long silence followed. Then Velzoth's voice returned, slower this time. "Clarify. You are suggesting they experience hardship willingly?" Zirek turned his gaze toward a nearby stall, where human warriors were engaged in a peculiar battle. They faced off against a towering contraption with a massive hammer, swinging it down upon a metal plate. A display flickered above, lighting up with numbers, perhaps a ranking system for warrior strength. Zirek watched in stunned silence as a small human child stepped forward, lifted the hammer with surprising ease, and sent the marker shooting to the top. The crowd erupted into cheers. His chest tightened. Earth did not merely train its adults for war, it trained children. "High Commander," he said, voice hoarse, "their war preparation begins at birth." Another pause. Zirek could hear the murmurs of the Veltharian War Council in the background. "Continue. Observation. Do not engage." Zirek exhaled. He would have no problem avoiding engagement. If these warriors were capable of such feats, direct confrontation would be suicide. He had to understand their methods, their doctrine, the nature of their command structure. That was when he spotted the human officer from earlier, the one issuing orders. He was older than the others, a grizzled warrior with short-cropped hair, and a firm expression. Unlike the others, he did not run to battle simulations with youthful enthusiasm. He walked with measured steps, his gaze sharp, assessing his troops as they charged headfirst into their trials. This had to be a true leader. A war general. Zirek narrowed his eyes and made a decision. If he wanted real answers, he would have to confront the man directly. He took a deep breath, straightened his stance, and stepped forward. Zirek 17 moved with measured precision, keeping a careful distance from the towering human he had identified as a war general. The man exuded authority. His clipped tone, confident stride, and the way his subordinates obeyed without hesitation all confirmed his rank. If there were any answers to be found, this human would have them. The general strode toward an open space where a peculiar trial was taking place. A line of warriors stood before a large vertical apparatus with a heavy mallet resting at its base. Each soldier took turns lifting the weapon and striking a metal plate with all their strength. At the top of the machine, a glowing gauge measured their impact, and a triumphant bell rang whenever someone achieved the highest score. Zirek watched, fascinated. This was no mere test of brute force. The humans had devised a structured system to measure and rank their soldiers' physical prowess, encouraging competition to foster improvement. It was efficient, ruthless. He was beginning to understand why their war doctrine was so advanced. A broad-shouldered man stepped forward, rolling his neck and flexing his fingers before gripping the hammer. He heaved it over his head and brought it down with devastating force. The gauge lit up instantly, flashing a bright red before the bell erupted in a victorious chime. The crowd roared with approval, warriors slapping the man's back in admiration. Zirek's mandibles tightened. These humans did not merely train for war, they celebrated it. Then something unexpected happened. A much smaller human approached, barely reaching the other's waists. The child, because that's what it had to be, stepped up with no hesitation, grasped the mallet, and, with surprising ease, swung it down. The marker shot straight to the top. The bell rang once more. The crowd erupted in even louder cheers. Zyrex stiffened. A species that trained its children in the same combat trials as its elite warriors. The implications were terrifying. This was not just a military force, it was a culture bred for war, where even the young were expected to endure and excel. He took an involuntary step backward. There would be no negotiation with a species like this. They did not fear battle. They embraced it. A group of soldiers moved past him, laughing and gesturing toward another area of the training grounds. Zirek followed their trajectory, careful to remain unseen. They approached a long, rectangular stall lined with what appeared to be primitive projectile weapons. Each soldier took position behind a station, where a row of small humanoid figures stood as targets in the distance. A commanding officer barked orders, and in perfect unison, the humans raised their weapons and fired. MBS burning from the Unreal Zyrek flinched as a series of rapid, concussive blasts filled the air. His mind reeled. He had assumed these projectile weapons were cumbersome and inefficient, yet the humans wielded them with flawless precision. The sheer speed at which they struck their targets was alarming. He analyzed the weapons more closely and frowned. They expelled no lethal energy. Instead, tiny metal spheres slammed into their marks, knocking them down with pinpoint accuracy. Training, ammunition. They were so confident in their ability to kill that they had reduced their weapons to mere practice tools. Even more unsettling, the soldiers weren't treating this as a grim exercise. They were laughing, competing. Their discipline never wavered, but their camaraderie was unlike anything he had ever seen in a military unit. Veltharian soldiers trained, in silence, driven by duty and fear. These warriors fought with joy. Zirek's breath quickened. Earth's war machine was unlike any he had encountered. Their tactics were unconventional, their attitude toward combat alarmingly casual. But the efficiency of their training methods was undeniable. He had to gather more data. He turned his attention back to the war general. The man had moved to another section of the grounds, where more soldiers were engaged in what seemed to be a trial of endurance. A vast, open structure loomed overhead, filled with narrow pathways, swinging obstacles, and treacherous gaps between platforms. Warriors raced across it, leaping, rolling, and climbing with astonishing agility. Zirek's gut twisted. It was a tactical maneuvering drill, a simulation of battlefield conditions. The course was designed to break weaker soldiers, filtering out those unfit for real combat. Yet, once again, the humans attacked the challenge with enthusiasm, cheering each other on, competing for speed. The course was brutal. Several recruits slipped, tumbling into padded pits below, but instead of conceding defeat, they laughed, dusted themselves off, and immediately lined up to try again. He could not comprehend it. The fear of failure should have been crippling. The consequences of weakness were severe in any warrior culture, but these humans enjoyed their own setbacks, treating them as nothing more than temporary hurdles. It was as if failure was simply another step toward eventual victory, and they were relentless. He needed to test them himself. He needed to understand what drove these warriors. Cautiously, he approached the starting point of the obstacle course, blending into the crowd of recruits. The humans around him hardly spared him a glance, too focused on their own performance. He studied the course layout, planning his approach. It was designed for creatures with a different physiology, but he was an elite Veltharian scout. His species had mastered adaptability. The signal sounded. Zyrek lunged forward, gripping a swinging rope and launching himself onto the first platform. The moment his feet made contact, the ground beneath him shifted violently. He barely had time to react before a rotating beam swept toward him, forcing him to duck. He rolled, narrowly avoiding a second strike, then sprang to his feet and sprinted toward the next section. A series of horizontal bars stretched out before him. He grabbed one and swung forward, using his momentum to propel himself across. The humans beside him moved with astonishing speed, their bodies perfectly attuned to the demands of the course. Zirek struggled to keep pace, his lienting physical demands. The final stretch was a high-speed climb up a near-vertical wall. The humans reached it before him, scaling it with almost insulting ease. He leaped, gripping the ledge, muscles straining as he pulled himself upward. He managed to crest the top, collapsing onto the platform just as the last of the recruits reached the finish line. Laughter surrounded him. Warriors clapped each other on the back, exchanging grins and playful jabs. Zirek lay there, stunned. He had completed the trial, yet no one cared. There was no punishment for his slower time, no shame cast upon him for lagging behind. It wasn't about winning, it was about persistence. Zirek pushed himself up, his mind racing. Every assumption he had made about human warfare had been wrong. They did not succeed because they were the strongest, nor because they were the fastest. They succeeded because they refused to accept defeat, and that made them the most terrifying warriors he had ever encountered. He turned, eyes searching for the war general. The man stood nearby, watching his recruits with a satisfied nod. Zirek clenched his fists. He needed answers. He needed to understand how humans had forged this war culture, and he would start with the man who commanded it. Zirek 17 wiped the sweat from his brow, his body still aching from the grueling trial he had just endured. The humans had moved on, laughing and joking, their stamina seemingly endless. He watched them with a mixture of admiration and unease. They were unlike any species he had ever encountered, unyielding, adaptable, and terrifyingly resilient. But his mission was not to be impressed. His mission was to understand. His gaze locked onto the war general, who stood a short distance away, arms crossed as he observed his soldiers with a practiced eye. The man radiated authority, his presence alone enough to command respect. If there was a leader among these warriors, it was him. Zirek knew he had to make contact, but approaching without arousing suspicion would be difficult. The humans had accepted him into their training exercises without question, but direct interaction with a superior officer was another matter entirely. Then an opportunity presented itself. A group of recruits had gathered around the general, engaged in a conversation that carried the air of both discipline and camaraderie. The general listened with an amused expression as one of the soldiers, a younger man with sharp features and an easy grin, spoke animatedly. "I'm telling you, sir, it was the worst drop ride I've ever been on. I swear I left my stomach at the top." The soldier clutched his midsection dramatically while the others chuckled. The general smirked. "You wanted intensity. You got it." "Yeah, but I was expecting something a little less lethal," the young man replied. Zirek's mind raced as he deciphered their words. Drop ride, likely another training simulation. Lethal, a term indicating high risk. But the conversation lacked the seriousness one would expect from warriors discussing life-threatening exercises. The humans treated their trials as entertainment, even when they described them with the gravity of combat. He took a breath and stepped forward. "You mentioned intensity," Zirek said, carefully forming the words through his translation module. "Your training is designed for suffering?" The group turned to him, surprised by the sudden interjection. The general's sharp eyes landed on him, and Zirek felt an immediate shift in the air. The man was assessing him, dissecting him with a single glance. Zirek had observed many commanding officers before, but none had ever made him feel as though they could see straight through him. "And you are?" the general asked, his voice calm but firm. Zirek hesitated. He needed to be careful. He had spent years studying infiltration, blending into alien societies. The key was offering just enough truth to satisfy curiosity without exposing vulnerability. "I am new to this training," he said. "I seek understanding." The general raised an eyebrow. "That right? You just decided to jump into an endurance trial without knowing what it was?" Zirek nodded. "It seemed necessary." The soldiers exchanged glances. One of them let out a low whistle. Gutsy. The general studied him for another long moment before finally nodding. Name's Colonel Grant. He gestured to the others. And these are my men. You looking to get stronger or just looking for a thrill? Zarek considered his words carefully. Strength. Resilience. I see that humans endure suffering. Willingly. This is unusual. Grant exhaled through his nose, amused. Yeah, well, suffering's part of life, son. Might as well get good at it. There it was again. That casual acceptance of hardship. No resentment, no hesitation, only certainty. Zarek had seen warriors who endured out of necessity, but humans chose to push themselves beyond their limits. Your people, they do not fear failure, Zarek asked. Grant studied him again, and for a moment Zarek worried he had pushed too far. Then the colonel shrugged. Fear's natural, but quitting, that's a choice, and around here we don't choose to quit. Zarek's stomach tightened. This philosophy was dangerous. He had always assumed war was won through superior strategy, technology, or numbers. But the humans had something more primal, an unwillingness to accept defeat, no matter how many times they fell. One of the soldiers clapped a hand on Zarek's shoulder, and he barely suppressed the urge to flinch. If you're looking for a real challenge, you should come with us to the gauntlet run. Zarek glanced at Grant, but the colonel simply smirked. Think you can handle it? Zarek didn't hesitate. I will try. Good answer, Grant said, turning. Away. Move out, men. Zarek followed, his mind racing. He had infiltrated war camps before. He had observed elite units in training, seen the making of hardened warriors. But never had he encountered a species that turned war into a game, hardship into tradition. And as much as he feared what that meant, he knew one thing for certain. The Veltharian High Command had no idea what they were dealing with. Zarek 17 kept close to the group as they moved toward a new section of the training grounds. The humans remained at ease, speaking in their strange, coded language of amusement and challenge, but their body language suggested focus. Even in their relaxed state, they were prepared. That unsettled him more than anything else. Warriors who were always ready for battle never needed time to adjust. They simply fought. Colonel Grant led them through a set of arching metal gates, beyond which lay a vast enclosed field littered with obstacles. Towering wooden walls, tangled nets, uneven terrain, and pools of dark water stretched out in a carefully designed gauntlet. Zarek scanned the area, noting the strategically placed traps and shifting platforms. It was a perfect simulation of battlefield chaos, demanding speed, strength, and adaptability. If he had not witnessed the humans' previous trials, he might have thought this was their final test, a rite of passage before true combat. Instead, they were grinning. All right, listen up, Grant called out, his voice carrying with effortless authority. You know the drill. Fastest time wins bragging rights, and I don't want to hear any excuses about mud, sweat, or tears. One of the soldiers groaned. Sir, my soul still hasn't recovered from last time. That's because you have no soul, Carter. Another soldier shot back. Laughter rippled through the group. Zarek remained silent, observing. They thrived on these interactions, as if competition and hardship were not burdens but bonds. He had seen soldiers fight together, but never like this, never with such ease. Grant's sharp gaze fell on him. New guys up first. Zarek stiffened. Me. You said you wanted to understand, Grant said. Best way to learn is by doing. The others murmured in agreement, nodding as if this was the most logical course of action. Zarek hesitated. He had undergone countless Veltharian trials, endurance drills that pushed him to his limits, combat simulations that tested his reflexes. This should have been no different, and yet the unpredictable nature of human training made it impossible. to know what awaited him. Still, hesitation would draw suspicion. He stepped forward. Grant gestured toward the starting line. "Clock starts when you cross. Finish however you can." Zirek nodded and crouched, his muscles tensed. He took a deep breath, scanning the gauntlet ahead. The humans had no idea they were dealing with a Veltharian scout, a being engineered for stealth, agility, and precision. If this was a test, he would not fail. A horn blasted. He exploded forward, leaping over the first barrier with ease. His body moved instinctively, adapting to the shifting terrain. The ground beneath him turned soft and treacherous, mud designed to slow him down. He adjusted his stride, bounding over the worst patches, but the moment he found solid footing, a tangle of swinging ropes blocked his path. He twisted mid-air, grabbing hold and using momentum to propel himself through. A human would have struggled to maintain balance, but his Veltharian physiology made adjusting effortless. He landed smoothly, already calculating the next set of obstacles. The soldiers behind him let out surprised whistles. "Damn, he's fast." "He's too fast." Zirek ignored them, pushing forward. A set of climbing walls loomed ahead. He reached for the highest grip, only to find the surface slick with some kind of viscous human chemical. His fingers slipped, forcing him to react quickly. He caught the lower grip, then another, scrambling up. Humans had intentionally made the challenge harder, not just physically, but psychologically. They forced participants to adapt, to fail and recover in an instant. He cleared the wall and sprinted into the final stretch, a narrow balance beam spanning a pool of murky water. Simple enough? He took a step. The beam shook violently beneath him. He barely caught himself before falling, his arms flaring out. To counterbalance. Another trick. The humans had engineered instability into the course, demanding control under unpredictable conditions. He grit his teeth, adjusting to the shifting weight, and forced himself forward. His foot slipped once, but he corrected instantly, lunging toward the finish. The moment his feet hit solid ground, the horn sounded again. Silence. Then, the humans erupted in cheers. That was insane. No way, he's never done this before. "Dude, do you have springs in your legs? Be honest." Zirek straightened, breathing heavily. They were praising him, not as a superior warrior, but as an equal. The distinction was strange, foreign. Grant clapped him on the back, nearly knocking him forward. "Not bad, rookie, but you burned yourself out on the first stretch. You need endurance, not just speed." Zirek turned to him, confused. "I finished," Grant smirked. "Sure, but winning isn't about just finishing. It's about finishing better than last time." Zirek frowned. That made no sense. A warrior's goal was victory, not self-improvement. Strength was a finite state. You either had it or you didn't. The idea that humans sought to refine themselves constantly, regardless of success or failure, was unsettling. The others took their turns, throwing themselves at the gauntlet with reckless enthusiasm. Some moved with calculated precision, others with sheer brute force, but all of them approached it with the same relentless energy. When they stumbled, they laughed. When they failed, they tried again. Zirek watched, realizing the terrifying truth. Humans did not just endure hardship. They welcomed it, not as a burden, but as a way to grow. For the first time, he wondered if Veltharian intelligence had been catastrophically wrong. The humans were not training for an imminent war. They were always training. A war against them would never be a war of attrition. It would be a war of endless escalation, and the Veltharians would lose. He turned to Grant, his voice quiet. "How long have you been preparing?" Grant glanced at him, raising an eyebrow. "For what?" Zirek swallowed. "For war." Grant studied him for a long moment before exhaling, rubbing his chin. "War's always possible, but that's not why we do this." Zirek frowned. "Then, why?" Grant's gaze swept over his. Men, watching as they helped each other up, joked, laughed, encouraged. "Because the world doesn't care if we're ready or not," he said. "So we make sure we are." Zirek had no response. He had infiltrated Earth to assess its military threat. And now, for the first time in his life, he felt something new. Dread, Zirek 17 had spent his life mastering deception. Yet, as he stood among the humans, coated in mud and sweat, he felt his carefully constructed identity begin to fray. Every mission before this had been simple: observe, analyze, report, no attachments, no doubt. But this time, something had changed. These humans, with their relentless drive, their refusal to accept limits, had disrupted everything he thought. He knew about war, about strength, about them. He needed to leave, immediately. But even as he tried to convince himself of that, his feet remained rooted to the ground, his sharp gaze flicking between Colonel Grant and his soldiers. Their training had ended for the day, yet they lingered, talking, laughing, sharing stories. This was no cold, calculated war machine. It was something far worse. The Veltharian High Command had anticipated human aggression. They had accounted for technological advancements, strategic unpredictability, even primitive savagery. But they had not accounted for just this. Humanity's greatest weapon was not their guns, nor their strategies. It was their ability to adapt, to endure, to persist beyond failure. And Zirek realized with a sinking certainty that an invasion would not crush them. It would forge them into something even stronger. A voice cut through his thoughts. "Something on your mind, rookie?" Colonel Grant stood beside him, his piercing eyes locked onto Zyrek's face. The man had been watching him more closely than he let on. Zirek had played his part well, but Grant was no fool. He had sensed the hesitation, the calculations behind Zirek's every move. Zirek turned toward him, suppressing the unease curling in his chest. "You train as if war is inevitable," Grant nodded. "It usually is." Zirek hesitated before asking, "And if it comes?" The colonel exhaled slowly, eyes sharp with understanding. "Then we fight." There was no bravado in his tone, no boastful declaration, just certainty. Zirek's mind raced. He had already transmitted preliminary reports back to Veltharian Command, detailing what he had observed, the endurance trials, the combat simulations, the unorthodox training rituals. But now, standing here, he realized his analysis had been incomplete. If his superiors ordered an attack based on what he had provided, they would miscalculate. They would believe humans could be broken through superior force. They would be wrong. He could still send another report. He could warn them, but the Veltharian war machine did not halt for a single scout's concerns. His duty was not to question. His duty was to obey. And yet, for the first time, he hesitated. A sudden crackling in his earpiece startled him. The encrypted channel buzzed to life, a voice speaking in urgent, clipped Veltharian. "Zirek 17, confirm position, new orders, incoming." He pressed a hand to his ear. "Receiving. Immediate withdrawal required, fleet movement authorized, conflict imminent." Zyrek's blood ran cold. The decision had already been made. The invasion was coming. His mind worked at impossible speed. He had two choices: return to his kind and let the war unfold, or— "Something wrong?" Grant's voice snapped him. "Back to the present." The colonel was watching him, his stance relaxed but his gaze sharp. A lifetime of instinct screamed at Zirek to lie, to deflect, to retreat before his cover was compromised, but he thought of the gauntlet course, of the soldiers pushing each other to rise after every fall. He thought of the way humans didn't just fight for survival, but for each other. He made his choice. His body moved before his mind could catch up. With a single motion, he grabbed Grant's wrist, gripping it tightly. The colonel tensed, reflexes honed from years of battle, but he did not strike. Not yet. Zirek leaned in, lowering his voice to a whisper. You must listen carefully. Your world is in danger. Grant's expression didn't change, but Zirek felt the shift in his posture, an imperceptible tightening of muscles, a readiness for action. The human did not ask questions. He simply prepared. Zirek forced himself to continue. I am not who you think I am. I was sent here to assess your strength for an invasion. Grant's jaw clenched. The laughter of his soldiers continued in the background, unaware of the silent battle unfolding between the two men. And Zirek took a breath. They believe they can break you. He met Grant's gaze, letting his words settle. They can't. The colonel remained silent for a long moment, searching Zirek's face for any sign of deception. Whatever he saw there made his decision for him. Without hesitation, he nodded. How long do we have? Zirek's earpiece crackled again. Fleet approaching lunar orbit, initiating planetary descent in... He ripped the device from his ear and crushed it beneath his boot. Not long, he said. Grant turned sharply, his voice carrying the full force of command. Carter, get me a secure line to command now. The soldier snapped to attention and sprinted off without question. The others, sensing the change in tone, straightened. Grant turned back to Zirek, eyes cold and calculating. If you're lying, I'll kill you myself. Zirek nodded. If I were lying, I wouldn't still be here. Grant studied him for another moment, then turned to his men. We move. Now. The soldiers didn't hesitate. Zirek followed, his heart pounding. He had betrayed his own kind. But as he looked at the humans, warriors who never stopped fighting, never stopped adapting, he knew one thing: he had chosen the winning side.